welcome to the service that will honor and celebrate the life of Patricia and Saul, fondly known to us as Pat. It has been wisely said that we die twice. The first death comes when our bodies finally give out, but our second death comes only when there is no one left to tell our stories. So we come together to acknowledge the first death of Pat and to forestall the second death by telling Pat's stories. There will be a community eulogy later in the service, so you can be thinking about what you might want to share about Pat. Before I deliver the eulogy, Pat was fond of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Pat marched to the beat of her own drum, which was somewhat unexpected because she was a firstborn child, the eldest of 4 girls. It's the eldest who usually stay closest to home, but as her sister Kathy points out, Pat's siblings didn't venture far from the rural areas of upstate New York, but Pat sure did. She was a New York, LA kind of gal. She wanted to be where the action was, where she could meet interesting people and have the opportunity to learn interesting things. Above all, she was fiercely independent, which for a woman of her generation, she lived 85 years, is a remarkable quality to achieve. A Renaissance woman, she was successful at 3 fairly different vocations. She modeled a bit at fancy boutiques in Manhattan. She was a buyer for many years for Alexander's department stores, a prominent department chain in the 60s and 70s. And finally, her main career was as an X-ray technician for Kaiser in Southern California. She was clever with her money and investments and lived a good life, happily independent. Briefly married, like for a minute, 3 months. When she was 20, Pat never ventured into partnerships the rest of her life. She was happy by herself. She took joy in spending time with people she chose to spend time with, especially people from different countries. At one point, she taught English as a second language to Russians, and then took them on trips to places like the Grand Canyon. Pat was worldly. She enjoyed those cross-cultural connections, traveling to interesting places such as Budapest. Being unattached allowed her to reach out to people who could be a little lost. Pat lived her liberal religious values of compassion and kindness, and not just toward people, but animals too. She cared for many animals in her home, her domestic companions. She was a very good aunt, taking interest in her nieces and staying in touch with them. Pat remained interested in fashion throughout her life, which went oddly hand in hand with her being quite unassuming and non-attention grabbing. While I can clearly see her black beret she was fond of wearing and her face, which seems to have invariably had a contented smile on it. I remember that twinkle in her eye. I can't honestly say I ever had a conversation with her, which I now regret. But that says a lot about Pat. People who know themselves very well don't have to speak as much. I recently heard a quotation of the author David Foster Wallace. He said he often wouldn't speak because you can't learn anything when you are speaking. You learn when you listen to others and pay attention to your surroundings. I think Pat understood that too. Pat ushered the 9:30 service quite faithfully for the past several years, participated in Michelle Hunnevan's Writing as a Spiritual Practice workshop, was an enthusiastic camper at Beneville Pines, and was a neighborhood church member since 1985 for 30 years. So independent did Pat insist on being that she wouldn't accept much help of any kind from pastoral care or even her neighbors toward the end of her life. I doubt she regrets it. Pat enjoyed being who she was, knowing well who she was. She was smart, kind-hearted, and self-sufficient. She lived that way, and she died that way. And now, let's hear some of Pat's stories in more detail, starting with her sister, Kathy.
You know, we've always been four sisters. Fran and sister, we're still four sisters, and on some level we are still four sisters. The loss there is strong. She moved out to this coast about 55 years ago, and we tried so hard to get her to come back with us. But until we came out here, we didn't realize that here you had much more to offer her. She enjoyed things here. She enjoyed the Pasadena Pops. She enjoyed the things at Occidental College. She was into something constantly. And when we did come, she would entertain us. What do you want to see? And she was always discouraged. She said, well, we want to see the desert. She says, well, didn't I show somebody else the desert? So I said, well, you didn't show me the desert. So she'd go to the living desert. And then somebody else came along and said, I want to see Griffith observatories. Okay, I'll take you to Griffith Observatory. She took us anywhere we wanted to go. And I enjoy museums. And since then, I looked through her address book, and she had about 15 museums that she knew exactly what their hours were when they'd be open. So she could take me. I think I went to a museum of neon art at one time.
Oh, that's the good one.
Little neon watch bands. But we would try to get her to come east. Too cold, she would say. But coming here this summer, I realized that she really enjoyed more what you had to offer here. As Hannah said, we do live in small towns, maybe even hick towns you'd call them. Once in a while, we'd go to the Metropolitan or Radio City Music Hall in downtown New York, but for the most part, we were small town people. But when I realized how involved with this church she was, and one thing that Hannah didn't get into too much is, now Pat started early with this modeling business, but she managed to keep it up with the Goodwill volunteers used to put on shows, and she enjoyed those shows. And now, what's the other occasion people get to dress up for? They get to dress up for Halloween. Well, we're going through her clothing to decide, what are we going to do with this besides give it to Goodwill? And we came across all kinds of costumes. And we came across a costume, and I remember a note on it. It was, I think she was a cat. And she said that tail was the hardest thing to make. and to hold it on, we had a picture of her holding her tail up. And I picked the tail up, and it weighed a ton. I don't know if she filled it with lead shot or what. But I said, gee, I could have made a lighter weight tail than that one. But she took Halloween more seriously than most 8-year-olds. Pat worked hard on being a friend, and the shops that she liked all knew her by name. Her insurance agent said, Pat, oh no, you don't mean something's happened to Pat. They just knew her as a person. She wasn't a client. She wasn't a customer. She was a friend to everyone. So all of you have been so kind. You all have our gratitude. Thank you. I did use my notes.
So after hearing from Kathy, it's time for our community eulogy, which is a chance for anyone who's so moved to come up, share a memory or a story about Pat. And I only ask that you keep it relatively brief so everyone has a chance, and do mention your relationship to Pat when you come up. And I believe Sally's going to get us started.
I'm Sally. I'm a longtime member here, and I've known Pat over the years, being a member of the church. I was in a writing group with her for a while, and then we also worked at Union Station. Phoebe reminded me we had a singles group, and it's a homeless shelter, and we would go once a month and make spaghetti from scratch, and big salad, chop up all the vegetables, and we did that once a month. And lately, over the last few years, I've known her because she's been a 9:30 usher, and I've been doing that for a number of years. We have a number of our other ushers here right now. And she's always had a smart comment to make, always very with it, and always with a jaunty hat, as you know. We had a lot in common. For one, she was in the fashion business, and when I first met her, my daughter was a teen model, a very shy young woman who was getting a lot out of Adrian Teen Models, well known in this area. And then I found out Pat had been the fit model. And did you see the picture of her? She was the one in the garment center. They tried on all the size 3s or something in the garment center. And my father-in-law worked in the garment center for 40 years, so I had a lot in common with her, and I lived in New York City for 10 years. She had been a buyer, as you said, at Alexander's. And if you lived on the East Coast, that was it. That was the store. Even now, she's still interested in fashion. When she'd come from Kaiser after one of her medical trips there, she said she would drive down Colorado, and on her way to Zelig's, the coffee shop right by Roman's, and she'd report back to me what the outfits looked like in the windows and how the dresses were. And she even told me about this one young woman at the Kaiser waiting room and what a beautiful dress she had on, and she was commenting to her about how great it was. And we'd always talk about how short the girls' dresses are these days. Over the past few months, since she'd been declining in health, in May she had to stop ushering. She would help me though if it was my turn to usher, and help us take the hymnals from the sanctuary and clean up afterwards. But we'd go out afterwards and have lunch. And we went to a number of places. We went to Zelig's by Roman's, and we sat outside there, and she liked to get tuna fish sandwiches. And you know, she was telling me a lot about her life and her background that I didn't know anything about before, the 4 of you, and how your dad was gone in World War II. And it's just an amazing life. She wanted to go to Mike and Ann's in South Pasadena, and we went there, a lovely restaurant. And a few times we went to La Monarca, a Mexican shop in South Pasadena. And the last time I saw her, we went to a sandwich place called Puerto Villa, a very Italian restaurant on Fair Oaks in California. And she liked it very much. And when we were at the counter paying, I overheard this woman speaking. And she had a very New York accent, and I really miss those accents. So I started talking to her, and sure enough, she was from the Bronx. And Pat was from Parkchester. And they started talking, and this lady was from the Concourse, I guess. The Grand Concourse, and I talked to her about it afterwards. She said that was the more Jewish area, and you all were in Parkchester, not that area at all. She said when she came to LA, she was in the Mid-Wilshire area, and there's a development there called Park La Brea, and it's kind of a city-type development, and she said when she saw that, that reminded her of Parkchester, and she wasn't going to live there at all. And I knew that her later life, she was an X-ray technician, and that she had retired from Kaiser. And I admired how she had gone back and forth to Kaiser as a patient now, and she had a lot of tales to tell. One time she said her arm blew up, something happened, she hit it, it blew up. She went to Kaiser, Pasadena, and they told her, oh, you've got to go to Kaiser Sunset, or you'll lose your arm. And so she went over there, and the Kaiser Sunset said, no, not at all. We don't do that anymore, they just wrapped it up. Well, she had all these adventures at Kaiser. Like one time she drove over to the hospital, never would ask for any help, nothing for pastoral care, always had to go by herself. And she parked her car, went in to be cared for, came out and could not find her car. And went round and round. And the guards, she said, they weren't allowed to take a patient around in the garage. So she walked around, but it was just like a big adventure to her. She didn't really want any help, but she did. She was okay with people calling her, and I know, Carla, you were calling her, and that was so nice. She didn't really want to leave her home because I talked to her about moving to where I'm living. It's kind of a retirement place. She really didn't want to leave her cat because he could come and go as he liked. And I think she knew that she was declining quite a bit, but it just made me realize that people have a right to live and die the way they want. She did not want to be in a hospital. She was done with Kaiser, but she really did, till the end, do exactly what she wanted. Thank you. Anyone else? Katrina, usher, extraordinaire.
Yes, another fellow usher.
Angry.
Pat and I had a lot of things in common because I went to high school in New York. I remember Alexander's, yes, and all those places. And I went to college in upstate New York, Ithaca. And so we're the East Coast people. Pat was a dear friend. And we met here, and my husband and I always pride ourselves of being the first one in the church every Sunday. But sometimes Pat beat us to it. I didn't like that part, I think. But that really gave us a lot of time. You know, after we finished like stuffing the hymn notes and all that, time and chance to talk. And so we always talk about the East Coast. And we might disagree on certain things, but she and I both agree we're never moving back. It's much, much nicer here. And Pat was somebody that always had a huge smile on her face. No matter what happened to her, and we didn't know what happened to her if she didn't tell us, okay? She's just so vibrant and so friendly. If you get to talk to her and get to know her. And I miss her, because when I come in here and nobody else is around, and I would say, where's Pat? And Pat was somebody that we could always rely on, because we all volunteers at the church, ushering or doing other things. And many times people don't show up. And as an usher, you're supposed to show up 30 minutes before the service time. And Pat was always early. And she was never absent until, was it May or April? And she did not come that Sunday. So Sally and I talked about it and said, it's so unlike Pat. She would always, she was a very, very responsible person. And that is when we started calling her. We found out that she wasn't feeling well. And we call her from time to time, but as Sally pointed out, every time we ask, is there anything we could do for you? He said, well, if I could drive, I will be at church. That's how she was. And even after she got, like in June, she still come to church. And I remember feeling her hand, and I said, Pat, your hands are very, very cold. And she said, yeah, that is just me. And I said, would you like us to drive you? Is that still okay that you come here by yourself? He said, oh yeah, I would make it. I would manage. And that's our Pat. And we were just so glad that the church had her and we had her as a friend.
Katrina and Pat see eye to eye.
Yes.
They're shorter.
Yes. True.
My name is Lindy Winterman, and I also was an usher with Pat. And I think maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I started, we ushered together the second Sunday of the month. And I play in the handbell choir, which we've been playing for about 10 years. And somehow or another realized that it would work better if we didn't usher together, but she was always willing to change with me. So if, depending on who was available for what Sunday for bell choir, if we were, I can't pass a plate and ring bells at the same time. I try to do a lot, but I can't do that. Anyway, she was willing to swap with me. One of my complaints was that she didn't have email. So I had to keep mailing her things saying, can you do this? Or I would call and follow up. But she was willing, and it really allowed, I think, for us to provide better services to the church community because we had this rhythm together that we could work it out together, and that was really cool. I didn't know a lot of her history, but one time when we were ushering, she had mentioned her birthday. Her birthday was March 17th, and she was named, I don't know if she was named after St. Patrick or however it was, but she mentioned that. And so I think a year or two later, Sunday was March 17th. So I dedicated the altar flowers to her, but I didn't write who it was from. I did something mysterious. And then when we were ushering, I said, oh, did you notice who the flowers are dedicated to? And she thought, well, who would have known that? But, my birthday's March 18th, so I always joke that she was just a year older. A day older, which isn't stretching the truth, but we had fun with it. So I always could remember to wish her a happy birthday, and she wished me a happy birthday. And my mom used the term Mutual Admiration Society a lot, and I always thought, maybe that's how I worded it in the order of service, but I thought that was a special bond that we shared.
Hi, my name is Nadia. I'm another usher. That's how we have the wonderful privilege to get to know Pat, Tim, and I, and the rest of us.